Hi. In our vast range of human ancestors, many stand out. Australopithecus was the first to innovate walking upright regularly. Homo erectus controlled fire and grew our brains so large that we started to differentiate ourselves from the animal kingdom. Some of our relatives are misunderstood due to just a simple lack of evidence to tell us anything about their lifestyles. But one is misunderstood not because we don't know much about it, the opposite is true in fact, but misunderstood because of the way our modern society has painted it. Close your eyes. Don't look, like, actually. Imagine a Neanderthal. What comes to mind? It's entirely possible that you thought of a large, lumbering, human-like figure with a large brow ridge, maybe with a club in its hand, possibly clubbing a woolly rhino to death. If you thought that, that's completely understandable. Although it has gotten better in recent years, modern science has generally painted Neanderthals as humans that are just bigger, stockier, and dumber. Even the name Neanderthal kind of gives an image of like, Urgh. But when we really look into the empirical evidence, we can see that in many, many ways, Neanderthals were just like us. They had complex community systems, cultures, took care of their loved ones, and were in many, many ways human. So today I hope to give you a newfound appreciation for our closest ancestor. Let's get into it. So it's summer 1856. Workers in a quarry spend their days mining for marble and limestone. As they dig further into the earth in order to feed the massive hunger of Victorian-era markets, the thick sediment requires blasting. Towards the top of the quarry lies a cave. The cave was plugged up by sediment, and workers did what they had to do. One worker shields his eyes from the explosion and the descending rubble. To his surprise, when he takes a look at the rocks at his feet, he notices something funny. Bones. Luckily, this worker was a member of the local Natural History Association and decided that these bones were something of note. He grabbed the bones and brought them to the founder of his local Natural History Association. The founder, Johann Fulro, after careful examination, thought that these bones were human, but interestingly, ancient human. The bones eventually made their way to Bonn in Germany, where expert scientists took a look for themselves. They noted the odd bulkiness of the skull fragments and the odd sloping forehead. The bones were submitted to the general meeting of the Natural History Society of Prussian Rhineland and Westphalia. After a few years, the first ever fossil human was named, Homo neanderthalensis. The name Neanderthal is pretty interesting actually, since it was the first of our ancestors that we found. The way it was named was pretty out of the ordinary when it comes to the way we name our ancestors. For example, the genus Australopithecus means southern ape because it was an ape from the south. Paranthropus means beside man because in our evolutionary tree they evolved beside us. Homo neanderthalensis means human of the Neander Valley. What? Take a look at this guy. Who's this guy? This is revered 17th century poet, songwriter, and certified Jesus lover Joachim Neander. His work became very famous after his death, and a certain gorge was named in his honor. Neander Valley would eventually be where the first Neanderthal bones were discovered. So we have the name Neander, which actually means new man, coincidentally. Pretty cool. The word Thal in German means valley. So slap on Homo to the front and ensis to the end, and you have Homo neanderthalensis, human of the Neander Valley. The following years would see many more discoveries of this new ancient genus. Since then, they have become our most well-understood ancestor. So let's take a look into what the average life of a Neanderthal would have looked like. So the early years of a Neanderthal's life wouldn't have been too dissimilar to ours. We have many specimens of young Neanderthals, some not even a year old. The information we can gather from these specimens is fascinating. We can actually see that Neanderthal babies developed quicker than Homo sapien babies. Modern human babies are basically helpless until they're around 3 years old, but a Neanderthal's brain may have developed a little bit faster, as well as having their teeth come in quicker, which would have allowed them to eat solid foods much earlier in life. In fact, Neanderthal brains, when they were finished developing, may have actually been larger than modern humans. This is only speculative though, as most of our specimens come from males, and males tend to have much larger heads than females. But what matters most there is the rapid development. So quicker development may seem like an advantage, but in reality it may have been disadvantageous for Neanderthals. in terms of cognitive development. Rebecca Sykes, author of Kindred, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death, and Art, proposed an interesting theory surrounding this. So imagine you're a baby, sitting there being useless and not paying your taxes, you socialist. While you are looking around at everything, your brain is absorbing an insane amount of information. You know how they say a kid's brain is a sponge? This is what I mean. A child's brain is very plastic, meaning it is highly adaptable and absorbs information very fast. It reacts to a changing environment quickly and adapts to new stimuli much better than an adult brain can. New neural connections come easily to a quickly developing brain. For us Homo sapiens, our time with a plastic brain allows us to understand complex societal and cultural ideas at a young age. For Neanderthals, this may have been out of the realm of possibility. While their bodies and craniums may have developed at a similar rate as our own, their faster-growing brains may have cut their physiological childhoods a little short, leaving them less time to learn complex social and technological skills. If I'm being totally honest here, this confuses me just a little bit, but I trust her insight. She has a PhD. I don't even have an associate's. So thank you, Dr. Sykes. I will leave a link in the description to buy this book. I highly suggest that you do that. I got mine from my local library, because you should always support your local library and local bookstore before you go somewhere like Amazon. And while you're down there, you could check out my Patreon if you want. You don't have to. Please? Please. Anyways, the skull itself looked a little different to ours. A Neanderthal baby would have had a more elongated face and lacked a prominent chin, features they would carry into adulthood. Their short yet deep rib cages suggest a stockier build compared to modern humans. These features would create the Neanderthal's iconic image, a bulkier human in a way. Side note, you may be wondering, why were Neanderthals so bulky? Well, it has to do with the environment that they lived in. Neanderthals initially evolved in Europe, and at that time, Europe was very, very cold. There were massive glaciers covering most of Europe and North America. Pretty much all of Canada and Scandinavia was just glacier. And because of the colder weather at the time, it became advantageous for mammal species to evolve a stockier build. Being bulky means that you have a much higher amount of lean muscle mass. Well, why would that help? Well, larger muscles generate more heat. Modern humans evolved in Africa, a warmer climate, so we have less muscle mass compared to our skin's surface area. This smaller disparity between surface area and muscle mass allows us to shed heat much quicker, as there is less muscle activity to generate said heat. Now, Neanderthals needed to stay warm, and so evolution took its course and allowed Neanderthals to have a much higher amount of natural muscle mass. Same amount of surface area relative to modern humans, but way more muscle to generate the heat they needed and more muscle to retain heat. This bulkier build allowed Neanderthals to thrive in a quickly cooling environment. This also plays into what is called Bergmann's rule, where mammals grow bigger body sizes evolutionarily to retain heat in colder environments, which is why the Pleistocene, or the Ice Age from around 2.6 million to 11,000 years ago, saw all the megafauna like mammoths and Paraceratherium, also known as the coolest thing that has ever existed ever. And just in case you were wondering, because I certainly was, Bergmann's rule applies to reptiles, but in the opposite way. So when the planet was warmer while dinosaurs were around, that's why they got so big. So, yeah. Anywho, I love going on tangents. Other than the familiar weirdness of their bodies, they may have lived very similar lives to us today. Well, not to us today, maybe like 1,000 years ago. I mean, you saw the Neanderthal in that insurance commercial. He didn't fit in at all. Their children likely grew up in a community, spending time watching and learning from others while getting to know the world around them. As they grew up, perhaps they would learn to hunt and forage by shadowing their parents and other members of their community. Maybe they spent their nights eating a communal meal with their family around a fire. But what would they be eating? Great question. Well, Neanderthals spread out pretty far and wide for their time, which means they would have partaken in a variety of diets, depending on where they settled down. There is an odd misconception that Neanderthals were primarily meat eaters. I don't know where this came from. Like, if that was true, then nobody would poop like ever, and we have evidence that they burned their poop in caves, so clearly they did. Whatever. Sure, maybe some groups that lived farther north in the colder areas where there was less plant growth definitely had to rely more on meat. But we'll get into that. We actually have much evidence hinting at what they ate. I'd first like to attribute this explanation to Anna Goldfield, who writes a column in archaeology magazine called Sapiens, and is also a licensed archaeologist. I'll link it in the description. Starting at the mouth, tooth enamel is an incredibly durable substance and can survive for thousands of years. Dental calculus, which according to Goldfield is in fact not a form of dental math, thank God, is hardened plaque on teeth that can contain microscopic chunks of microbial and plant remains, sometimes even DNA. In Spy Cave in Belgium, one of the most famous Neanderthal sites, scientists identified remains of woolly rhino and wild mountain sheep in the plaque of the cave's former inhabitants. Further examination suggests that this group had a meat-heavy diet. Belgium, at this time around 36,000 years ago, may have been mostly in the throes of a glacial period. Maybe there was less plant growth that they could have taken advantage of, so they resorted to a meat-heavy diet. In a similar case farther south in El Cedrón Cave in Spain, scientists identified parts of mushrooms, pine nuts, and moss in the dental plaque of Neanderthal remains. This region farther south and warmer wouldn't have been as stringent when it came to variety of diet you could partake in. Adopting wide varieties of diets allowed Neanderthals to spread out very far. But what did Neanderthal travel look like? Well, Neanderthals appeared in Europe or Western Asia around 700,000 years ago. Until their extinction about 40,000 years ago, they migrated across almost all of Western Europe and parts of the Mediterranean. We've even found evidence that they inhabited the Greek island of Crete, which, at that time that they came there, may have still been an island, so seafaring Neanderthals, anyone? I'm down. Here's where it gets interesting. We have found evidence of Neanderthal populations as far east as eastern Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, as well as Lower Turkey and Upper Syria. What's odd about this is that we have not found evidence of Neanderthals in between. So our current Neanderthal population map looks suspiciously incomplete. It'll definitely take more time to know for sure, perhaps we may never know. But what we do know is that Neanderthals were definitely not deterred by travel. Evidence suggests that they may have migrated during winters from Europe down to the Middle East where it was warmer, and it may have been in the Middle East where they may have met a weirdly familiar looking sister genus of human. There are many sites in Europe and one in Middle Russia that suggest Homo sapien and Neanderthal interbreeding events ranging from 250,000 to 200,000 years ago. But where this happened more than anywhere else was the Middle East, with evidence suggesting interbreeding events happened several times there. A large number of groups in Africa and Europe can actually trace part of their lineage back to Neanderthals, which unfortunately does apparently predispose people to genetic diseases like type 2 diabetes, depression, autoimmune diseases, a lot more, sorry. However, Neanderthals were definitely not picky when it came to mate selection. Denisova Cave in Russia has provided scientists with fascinating evidence that has helped them flesh out the concept of another human ancestor, the Denisovans. In this cave, a certain specimen creatively known as Denisova 11 was a young girl who was essentially the product of a Denisovan and Neanderthal interbreeding, them being the mother and father respectively. Did this girl travel to Russia with her Denisova community, or did the Neanderthals meet them there? You may never know. Speaking of migration, you know when you go on a road trip and you make pit stops at a 7-Eleven, buy a hot dog that gives you food poisoning? Well, Neanderthals also made pit stops, but their favorite was caves. Almost all Neanderthal evidence that we have comes from caves, and boy did they love caves. We have evidence that Neanderthals split chosen caves into sections for various activities. One part might be for animal butchering, another for going to the bathroom. They also participated in various rituals, and by rituals I don't mean like animal sacrifices to appease a god or something. Although in my mind, complicated practices with various intentions are definitely not out of the realm of possibility. But what I mean here is things like intentional art and construction. Some scientists believe that Neanderthals were actually painting on cave walls before Homo sapiens. This is debated, although in some places it is certainly true. There are several sites in Spain, such as La Pasiega, with art dating back 64,800 years. Ardales, also in Spain, features art thousands of years apart in time. Some are around 45 to 48,000 years old, the oldest being 65,500 years old. The oldest in Montroviejo, which is in west central Spain, contains red stencil markings over 66,000 years old. The one in La Pasiega is particularly interesting. The art consists of an interesting stack of roughly drawn squares with finer animal portraits inside, along with an assortment of dots on the outside. The symbolism of this art is completely lost on us, obviously, but here's what's cool about it. The roughly drawn parts, the squares and dots, date back to a time when the cave was inhabited by Neanderthals, and the animal drawings date later on when Homo sapiens inhabited the cave. So it's very possible that the roughly drawn parts were made by Neanderthals and then Homo sapiens later on found it and decided to add to it, without even knowing that it was made by Neanderthals. That is wild. Neanderthals didn't just limit their artistic prowess to the finer things, though. I'm sorry, French people, I love you, you make great food. I'm gonna butcher the name of this cave. Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France gives us a fascinating glimpse into the world of, let's say, Neanderthal abstract art. Kind of like this ugly-ass thing that my city put in right next to a roundabout that is insanely distracting, wasting my damn tax dollars on trash. It's supposed to be a cactus, by the way. Why would they do, like, the lime green stripes on the silver... Whatever. Anyways, around 336 meters into this cave, around a fifth of a mile, scientists discovered evidence of fire as well as fragments of stalagmites arranged in an odd ring formation dating back 176,000 years. Why they did this, we have no idea. But it does further add to the idea that Neanderthals were able to use that big chunk of galvanized meat in their heads to make some really interesting stuff. Neanderthals often ventured into caves. It's where they chose to live. And sometimes perhaps they would have been pursued by a cave lion or a cave bear. Maybe one of them would have fallen over and hurt themselves. What this would lead to is Neanderthals dying occasionally. It was quite common for them to die, so much so that they're not around anymore. That was stupid, sorry. Well, what do us modern humans usually do with a dead body? Well, you could either bury it, you could cremate it, or leave it over there. I don't care. It's up to you. People dying is generally a sad affair, and a lot of care and respect is put into this burial practice. This was likely no different for Neanderthals. Neanderthals certainly purposefully buried their dead, sometimes in very sophisticated ways. Here's my favorite example in Shenadar Cave in Iraq. In total, 35 specimens were discovered inside the cave, most under around 45 feet worth of sediment. One individual, however, was special. I can't seem to find a name for the specimen, but archaeological digs have discovered an unusual amount of flower pollen surrounding the bones. The pollen includes yarrow, cornflower, and more. What this suggests is that possibly this Neanderthal was purposefully buried upon a bed of flowers by their community. Can you imagine the care that their family and friends must have put into this burial? Maybe these flowers were their favorite flowers. Can you imagine the grieving that they must have felt? Somebody who was probably a father, mother, brother, sister, friend. Maybe I get too wrapped up in this kind of stuff, but this one genuinely makes me a little emotional. There are many other sites that show us Neanderthals buried their dead with intention. Time has not been too nice to them, but since all of them are in caves, they do preserve remarkably well. So through birth, life, and death, Neanderthals were not so different from us. They were born like us, grew up like us, lived like us, died like us, buried their dead like us. Modern society has not given enough credit to our closest ancestor, who really laid the groundwork for our habitation. I think we should all take some time to give some love to our evolutionary sibling, just a little more. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead, subscribe if you want. Go down in the description, buy Rebecca Sykes' book, it's really good. Maybe check out my Patreon if you want, it's up to you. Alright, thanks. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thank God I had to pee so bad.